I'm your co-host, Tom Lowy.
And I'm Sister Sarah Burdick. And today, Tom, we have a very special show. The music that you will hear today on Notes from Above was chosen by Jeff Stemberger. Unfortunately, Jeff is not able to be with us today in the studio, but I know that he's listening. Jeff is in the final stage of his journey in this life. Jeff Stemberger was diagnosed with cancer of the esophagus in October of 2005.
Initially, he had a cancer which is described as a T3N1 cancer. That means the cancer had penetrated the muscle lining of the esophagus, and we had seen some local lymph nodes. So the cancer had spread outside the esophagus. So we knew this was going to be an uphill battle. But given that he was a young man who was in his 40s, he had young kids, everybody wanted to cure him.
Jeff just knew it was very devastating. It was going to be a battle, basically, and he wanted to fight it, and I was going to support him.
I think he was always optimistic. I think he did a very good job of finding the best medical group that he possibly could. To find just one superstar was not going to probably help us because we knew that we'd be relying on an entire team. And by far the finest team we saw happened to be at St. Joe's.
St. Joseph Mercy Hospital is a center of excellence for esophageal care because I think we offer all of the various aspects of treatment for esophageal disease, especially esophageal dysplasia and cancer. We offer the full gamut of treatment, including minimally invasive treatments, mucosal resections for limited cancers, and also robotic-assisted minimally invasive techniques for surgical resection of the esophagus. Heartburn for most people is sort of an irritating symptom. They don't really consider heartburn somehow linked to cancer, and that's one of the big problems I think that's going on in our population currently. This is an epidemic. This is indirectly linked to the obesity epidemic, and it doesn't need to be dramatic. And the weight gain can be very subtle. So when you're 22, you may be very fit and 180, and then 6 years later, you may be 240 pounds, and you really didn't see that coming. And all the while, your reflux symptoms slowly increase. If you think about food going down the esophagus all day, scraping the esophagus, it has to be relatively hearty. The only thing the esophagus is sensitive to is acid. Now, the stomach makes acid. Acid is made by the stomach to help neutralize food, sterilize food, and start the first parts of digestion. The stomach has a special lining that allows it to be protected from the acid because it makes it. Okay? Now, the esophagus doesn't. In some people, that acid comes from the stomach into the esophagus. When that happens, you get what we call heartburn, which is basically a burning feeling under your breastbone. And that's heartburn typically occurring after eating. Now, when that happens over and over daily, multiple times a day, your esophagus wakes up and says, okay, gee, this guy is treating me like a stomach. I'm going to start looking like a stomach. So the esophagus lining then changes to resemble the lining of the stomach. The cells actually change. Unfortunately, that change in the esophagus is precancerous, and that's called Barrett's. Once you develop Barrett's, your heartburn symptoms actually go away or may reduce. Barrett's esophagus makes the esophagus less sensitive to acid. So they may still be obese, still may not eat well, but suddenly their heartburn goes away and they feel that, oh, gee, that's not a problem I have to deal with anymore. So they continue these lifestyle habits. I find that the hope and the spirit of the person is as important as anything we do. And Jeff had loads of spirit in the sense that he was one of the most optimistic people I've ever met.
And he wanted to make sure that he could share this with others and help someone.
And I think he wanted to jump into this project like every other project he ever done with both feet. And the best way to do that was to take notes, thoroughly keep notes, and to write all the things down in the medical field and the lab reports, the personalities, the people that he had run into on an ongoing basis, and do that in a documented way.
I think you really wanted to write a book about it to educate other people, and that's what we're doing right now. We want to educate people what to expect when they're diagnosed with any type of cancer, especially esophageal.
I've decided to start documenting this journey that I have been chosen for in hopes that it will help
others understand what I have and will be experiencing.
I hope in the long run that things will work out in my favor, so that I can help others get through the journeys that they have been chosen for by God.
I am not bitter that this has happened to me. I believe God has chosen me for a reason. I don't know what that reason is
yet, but I expect to find out during the journey. I have not sat back and said, why me?
Only God knows why. The people who are at greatest risk for developing esophageal adenocarcinoma are essentially white men. So if you are a middle-aged 40 to 50-year-old white man who's had reflux for most of his life or 5 years, you probably, one can argue, to get an endoscopy done.
If there is a warning sign of any kind, that you don't take it lightly. You know, I used to be a lot more hands off with that. Oh, just sleep on it, it's going to go away. And, you know, fortunately for me, that's been okay. But over the last several years, and especially going through what Jeff's been through, it's kind of like, you know what, I'm going to ask my doctor about this.
If you have uncontrolled reflux that has been persistent, and despite lifestyle measures, eating less, some medications, and your symptoms are still persistent, you should get evaluated. And the best way to diagnose esophageal cancer is to do an endoscopy. Endoscopy is where we take a little camera, put it in the esophagus, and look at the esophagus.
Well, Jeff's cancer certainly did get my attention in my own health. Specifically, after he had been diagnosed, he passed away, my brother Brian and myself immediately went to have endoscopies done.
Don't ignore any symptoms. Don't think that, oh, it's going to go away if I take an antacid. But do get checked out professionally and find out exactly what's going on.
My doctor, who was very insightful, still did not want me to have the endoscopy because he didn't see any symptom.
The average primary care physician needs to know that heartburn is not a benign disease. Heartburn over the long period has to be treated in the same way as you treat a heart attack.
So I had to go actually to the department and negotiate with the guy who was performing the endoscopy to say, I'm here for a colonoscopy, but because of my history, would you please help me with an endoscopy? And he did so. And I'm happy that he did, because both myself and my brother Brian have been diagnosed with the early stages of Barrett's. And it's not something we're fearful of, but it is something that we have to be scoped for on a regular basis, maybe once or twice a year, to work on the prevention and to make sure that it stays at bay.
Whenever one of my patients has Barrett's esophagus, it's usually very normal for them to be very scared about that diagnosis. The first thing I tell them is that the minority of people with Barrett's esophagus develop cancer, less than 10%. The treatment of esophageal cancer has evolved the way that treatment for colon cancer and colon polyps has evolved. Many years ago, we used to remove the whole colon in order to remove a precancerous polyp. The standard of care in most places now is to remove the esophagus for precancerous conditions of the esophagus. We now have the capability, at least at this hospital, to remove the precancers endoscopically. The same way that we can preserve the colon, we now can preserve the esophagus.
At this particular point in time, the symptoms are somewhat tough to detect. For example, many people that smoke or drink might be susceptible to esophageal cancer.
Well, he didn't smoke and drink, but he let calories consume him. Inactivity, eating more, gaining weight, not exercising, led to his premature death.
And typically you would probably start your endoscopy screening about the age of 50. Of course, he passed away at the age of 43.
If there's anyone out there that has a dad that they think might have problems with any type of cancer, I think you should encourage him to get checked out, because you can never be too safe, and you're not invincible, and anything can happen to your family.
So the number one thing I can tell any young dad is, as much as you want to obsess about material things, the thing they care about is you. You got to be around, and if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be around.